All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Rob Penzak, one of the co-leaders of Richmond Humanist and founder of SavedByScience. Welcome to tonight's debate. I'd like to first start by thanking First UU for allowing us to use the facilities, Paul Dolce, for helping on the technical end of things, Jason Gregory for helping make sure that we stay on time as best we are able to. We also want to thank the panelists for the work and thought they've put into the questions. I want to thank everybody in the audience for coming out to engage our democratic process. And I want to thank the two candidates for giving us a chance to learn a little bit more about them before the June 12th primary. So before we get started, I want to ask everybody if you can turn off or turn silent any electronic devices while we go through some rules for the debate. So first off, this is intended to be an educational, nonpartisan event. It's not a rally. And I actually mean that with all seriousness. So several of the groups participating tonight are 501c3 nonprofits. So we are welcome to do these kind of primary debates, but the goal is not to, we're not going to endorse a candidate, and this should not be taken to suggest that we're supporting a specific party. This is really just a chance for everybody here to get to know, the candidates running for the 7th district in the Democratic primary. If during tonight's debate you decide that you would like to get involved with one of the campaigns, that's perfectly fine, but please do not do so in the context of tonight's event. Okay? The campaigns left literature up front, so you can look at that and see how to reach out and contact the campaigns later. But again, don't do that in this building. Don't do it tonight. We're not allowed to do that kind of campaign stuff as a nonprofit. Now, the panelists have come up with a mix of questions, some of which are relevant to the specific interest of their group, and some of which are of general concern to everybody. What we're going to do is go through and have each panelist ask a question, and then we're going to go to the audience for a few questions. At the 1 hour mark, we're going to take a quick break for a few minutes for people to recover, and then we'll come back for a second hour. If you would like to ask questions from the audience, I want you to keep a few things in mind. First of all, questions should be applicable to both candidates, not just one. They should avoid hyperbole, kind of loaded language. We're not trying to make our own political statements tonight. We're just trying to find out how the candidates think and where they stand on different issues. Please do not ask the candidate to pledge themselves to a certain platform or piece of legislation. You can ask them what they think about stuff, but don't try to commit them to a specific thing. Okay, and a final word. If you volunteer for one of the campaigns or work for one of the campaigns, please leave the questioning to other people in the audience just so we don't create the appearance of or the reality of any bias. We really do need to keep this a strictly neutral event. Related to that, since we are nonprofits and we do need to maintain that strict neutrality, neither myself or any of the panelists are going to be fact-checking the candidates tonight. So while we do expect everybody to be honest and upfront with their answers, even if we disagree with something strongly, we're not going to say anything about it. So this means that it's up to the candidates, either in their initial response to the other person or in an actual rebuttal, that they need to do the fact-checking on one another. I'd also encourage everybody in the audience, if something didn't quite sound right to you when you go home, do the fact-checking yourself. Okay, as we get underway, each candidate is going to have time for a 3-minute introduction. After that, we're going to go back and forth with the candidates responding to the identical question. We'll have 2 minutes to respond to that. If the first person that responds wants to do a formal rebuttal, they'll have a minute to do that, and the second candidate will as well. If the first candidate just wants to let the responses stand on their own, we'll simply move on to the next question and can cover a little more ground. Okay, everybody is welcome to take pictures if you would like, but please turn off the flash on your camera so you're not distracting the candidates. We're also going to be recording this event. We should capture pretty good video and good audio. We'll post that online hopefully tomorrow if there aren't any technical glitches. So it's okay if other people record, but we should have a high quality recording online pretty quickly. Okay. Ms. Spanberger won the opening coin flip, and she's elected to make the last closing statement. Mr. Ward has elected to make the first opening statement. During the debate, I want everybody to avoid any displays, whether you like a response or don't. We want to keep it quiet. We're not here to rally or support a specific stance, and we want to get through as much stuff as we can. So I'd ask you to save any applause or jeers or boos, and don't do this during the debate. At the end, you'll have a chance. And right now, I'd like everybody to help me in welcoming the candidates, Ms. Abigail Spanberger and Ms. Dan Ward. Mr. Ward, you have 3 minutes for your opening statement.
Yeah, check. There we go. Good evening, everybody. Woo. Hello. Check, check. How's that working? Better? Yes. All right, good. Didn't want the echo. Wow, what an audience. This is by far the biggest audience we've had participate, and it's really good to see everybody out here. I think it's indicative of where we are in enthusiasm about stopping what's going on in this country. My name is Dan Ward, and I live in a farm up in Orange County, Virginia. I'm a retired Marine, and I believe that our country is facing a very dire situation. 2018 is going to go down in history as a significant year. Whether it's a significant year in the good way or the bad way is to be determined. And folks, it's important that we have this kind of enthusiasm to make sure that determination is in the correct way. Our institutions are under assault. The rule of law is under assault. Reason is under assault. And they're trying to roll back enlightenment in order to preserve power for corrupt purposes. This administration is doing that. And Dave Bratt is parroting the lies, he's parroting the conspiracies, whether it's the deep state or whether it's the takedown of the fake news. And it's time to stop it. It is time to stop it. It is time to stand up to it. And that's what I'm doing. Our institutions are what protect us, folks. And they're starting to crack. The media, right now, fake news, is being discredited, and I think they've done a pretty good job of discrediting the media. Now it's the Department of Justice. When Deputy Rosenstein is briefing Devin Nunes and Trump's lawyer in the halls of Congress, it's a problem, and we got to stand up to it. They're starting to crack. Folks, and let's not forget about Mitch McConnell holding all those judgeships back so Donald Trump could appoint them. The courts that overturn voter suppression laws. And when you pack the courts with compliant judges, those laws don't get overturned, and that's how power is preserved. I've seen this my whole life. I have fought against this my whole life. We in America are not used to seeing it. It's happening, and it's time to stand up, folks. It is time to stand up to what's going on, because if we don't, we're going to lose it. And I'm telling you what, folks, it is going to take a unified effort to do this. Let's not forget that Ralph Northam lost this district by 3.5 points a mere 7 months ago. It's going to take a unified effort and then some. So whatever happens on June 12th, on June 13th, we are unified and we're moving forward. And we're going to win because we have to win. My name is Ward. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to remind people, other than the opening statements, so you can give Abigail the same if she earns that, but we really do want to refrain. We don't want applause or anything else throughout the debate, except you may do it in Abigail's, Ms. Spanberger's opening also. Sorry. All right, so Ms. Spanberger, you have 3 minutes.
My name is Abigail Spanberger, and I am the Democratic nomination in Virginia's 7th District. And I am running because the 7th District deserves a representative who is committed to understanding the challenges and the concerns of the people in the 7th District. And we deserve a representative who will work day in and day out to make the lives of her constituents better. And we deserve someone who will be accountable to the people they serve. And my background is in service. I am a former CIA operations officer. I worked overseas and domestically, and I was working to keep this country safe from a terrorist threat and to collect the vital information that would allow our policymakers, our president, our military, and our diplomats to make the best and most informed decisions possible. And that meant that at times I was sitting across the table from someone very different from myself, where the only thing we could agree on was the idea that we didn't want our countries to go to war. But it was finding that commonality that allowed me to serve the purpose of keeping this country safe from a terrorist threat and ensuring that anyone walking into a negotiation worldwide had the best, most well-sourced intelligence available to them to aid in that effort. And I lived overseas, and I lived most recently in California, and back in 2014, we were talking about where we were going to bid next. And we talked with our daughter, would we go to Nairobi or San Jose or London or Berlin? And our daughter said, what about Virginia? We said, what about Nairobi or San Jose or London? And our daughter said, but everyone we love is in Virginia. Why wouldn't we go to Virginia? And for me, it was a point of inflection because I had been so focused on my goal of serving in national security, but I wasn't invested in a community. And my husband and I both grew up in the 7th District, in Henrico County, in families that were invested in our community. And I realized that that is what we wanted for our family. So in 2014, I pivoted away from public service and to community service. We moved back to Virginia. I got a job in the private sector. I started a Girl Scout troop. I got involved with Moms Demand Action, the Democratic Party. I was appointed to Virginia's Fair Housing Board, and I focused on serving this community. And in 2016 and 2017, I worked on the elections because the divisive language that was starting to permeate through our political system was alarming to me. And I am now running for Congress because I want to stand up to that rhetoric and that divisive language, and I want to work to serve the people of this community. And we have built an incredible operation. We have built an incredible campaign that will help us flip this district so that we can deliver just that, better representation and better service to the people who live in the 7th District. Thank you. Are we supposed to stand?
Yeah, I think so. Stand up here. Get your
Okay, so no more applause from now on until the very end. I do want to remind both of you, if you can stay kind of by the podiums, otherwise you drift off camera, so I tried to fix that. But all right, so the first question is going to go to Mr. Jason Callahan from Greater Richmond Humanists.
Is this on? Okay. My name is Jason Callahan. I am with the Greater Richmond Humanists. We are a local chapter of the American Humanist Association. We're a community that looks at providing opportunities of education, activism, but also community development within the Richmond community. In addition to that, we are informed by science, and we allow reason to be what guides us in how we go about our lives. So the first question I would like to ask the both of you is this. Marcus Peters, an unarmed black man in distress who happened to be a leader in this community, was killed 2 weeks ago by a police officer on I-95. His sister states that she wants to work with police to improve training and methods for handling such situations with people in distress. Do you think law enforcement has exhibited a problematic pattern of behaviors towards blacks? If so, how do you suggest we hold the police accountable? And how would you strengthen relationships between police and this community?
Okay, so Mr. Ward, you're going to go first this round. You have 2 minutes to respond. Also remember, so those red rubber little pieces, if either of you, if you would like to do a rebuttal, either put that on your table afterward or show it to me so I'll know to call on you. So you have 2 minutes.
So to answer your first question, which is about the relationship between the African American community and police and how they handled that situation and accountability. Absolutely not. They did not handle it well. As somebody that spent nearly 25 years in the Marine Corps, rules of engagement are taught to us early on, and they are beat into our heads, and oftentimes we were not allowed to shoot until we were shot at. And that's discipline. And that discipline needs to be better served and better trained in our police forces because there are too many people, particularly young African Americans, being killed in this country, and the accountability is not there. It is just not there. The statistics, everything shows that, and we've got to do something about it. And it starts with training, and it starts with training with a fundamental understanding that there is a bias that is inherent in our judicial system, and it starts at the DA, it starts at the police, it starts at the judges. We need absolute criminal justice reform and police training on that one to fix that, because he should not have been killed. He was not a threat to that person's life. He was unarmed, he was naked, he clearly had mental health issues. So that's where he needed to be treated, is as if he had, with compassion and with treatment in the mental health. The second part of your question was strengthening the relationship between the African American community and the police department. Our police departments need to be reflective of our communities, and they are not right now. We need to do a better job of recruiting African Americans into the police force so they're more representative of the community. And then if we can do that, I think what we'll find is that you'll start having a better relationship with the police department. But I understand it is difficult right now because a lot of African Americans do not want to work for the police department. And there are lots of reasons behind that. But that has got to be started somewhere. I guess I'm out of time. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. And so thank you for stopping abruptly. We're asking the candidates, once they're out of time, really to wind it up quickly. If they need to finish that thought, they can do so in their next response. Ms. Spanberger, you have 2 minutes.
Yes. So I watched the body camera video of this man's death. And for anyone who saw it, I think it was clear that he was suffering from mental health issues. His behavior was erratic and confused seeming. I myself am not a mental health professional, but to the layman's view, his behavior was so erratic and confusing. So I think that it speaks to a number of things. It speaks to the fact that, as from the point of view of a potential federal legislator, we need to ensure that mental health protections are in place. We need to ensure that there is greater access to mental health resources for those who may need them. And when we're looking at what happened with this police encounter, we need to understand that police officers need tools of de-escalation. And there is currently legislation before Congress that, among other things, would provide funding to localities to ensure that they can train in inherent bias, and the inherent bias that it may exist among police officers, but that they may also train especially in de-escalation. Because I do understand that from the perspective of someone on the ground, I'm a former federal law enforcement officer, I carried a gun, I've made entry on homes, I have pointed my gun at people previously. I do understand what a tense situation that can be, but the training in de-escalating a situation or in being able to correctly identify when someone's erratic behavior is more indicative of a need for mental health services is incredibly important. What we can do longer term to strengthen the relationships between communities and police is dependent on, in some localities, but there is a role for the federal government to play in providing incentives and providing resources for training so that communities can focus on community building and community policing to the benefit of the people that law enforcement members are intending to serve.
Okay. I think we're going to take a brief pause just to fix the microphone here. Okay. Thank you. The second question, this is Deborah Riggs from National Association of Social Workers, Virginia chapter, and she's going to ask some questions on behalf of Compassion and Choices.
Thank you. I'm Deb Riggs, and I am the Executive Director of the National Association of Social Workers for Virginia, representing about 3,500 social workers in the state and 145,000 nationally. And social workers believe in the dignity and worth of every person. And I'm also here representing Compassion and Choices. My question is, a number of states now allow medical aid in dying, which is the medical practice of allowing a mentally capable, terminally ill individual to obtain a prescription from his or her physician that would allow the individual to end their life peacefully at the time and place of their choosing. In those states, some religious healthcare institutions, most notably Catholic health institutions and systems, routinely place themselves in the middle of the doctor-patient relationship and prohibit their doctors from informing patients that medical aid in dying isn't even an option. What are your thoughts on legislation that would legalize medical aid in dying? And more generally, what are your thoughts on permitting religious healthcare institutions to dictate what their physicians are allowed to discuss with their patients?
Okay. Ms. Spanberger, you have 2 minutes for a response.
So I support, and I would support legislation that legalizes the right to die with dignity of a person's choosing, and that would include allowing for medical providers to provide prescriptions for life-ending prescriptions in the cases of someone who's deemed medically competent to make that decision, mentally competent to make that decision. I oppose the ability of religious institutions to put their religious-based ideas on individuals and their healthcare choices and options. I believe that we should trust people to have relationships with their healthcare providers that lead them to make strong decisions based on their medical practices, and I do not believe that people should have the option to allow their own personal beliefs to dictate the type of medical care that they are providing their patients.
Okay. Mr. Ward, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I also believe that people should have the right to die with dignity in the time and in the place they're choosing if they are mentally capable of making that decision. I think it's humane. I think it is, it's dignified. And if that's what they want to do, they should be able to do that. And listen, this country was founded on a very strict separation of church and state. And I look at that as well into the doctor-patient relationship, and that should pertain to that as well. So I don't believe churches should be interfering with a patient and their doctor. If that patient wants to bring the church into that discussion, they should be able to do that, but the church should not interject themselves into that conversation. Thank you.
Okay, right now we're missing one of our panelists. We're going to skip over their question. I'll ask that later if they don't arrive over the next hour. So next up is Scott Lewis with Richmond Reason and Naturalism Association.
Good evening. I'm Scott Lewis with Richmond Reason and Naturalism Association, or RRNA. We are a social and educational organization for people in the Richmond area who have a naturalistic worldview. The naturalistic perspective is heavily informed by science, and we are, among other things, atheist and humanist. Our organization is like others in that many of us value feeling connected within our community. Unfortunately, the rates of loneliness have doubled in the United States since the 1980s. Vivek Murthy, who recently served as U.S. Surgeon General, declared in 2017 that the United States is experiencing a loneliness epidemic. Does the government have a role to play in helping its citizens find fulfilling human connection? And if so, how might it do that?
Okay, Mr. Ward, you have 2 minutes.
That's a tough question. So I want to make sure I got this right. So the question is does the government play a role in fulfilling kind of human interaction? Is that in essence what you're talking about?
Yes, based on the Surgeon General's report.
Okay, could you expand on that just a little bit more?
Do you think the government has any role to play in it, or any type of programs or initiatives to assist with people that may feel isolated?
So, the government has a lot of roles in our lives, and it is a glue for our society. So in that sense, I would say yes. We have programs that make the foundation of what we are as a country, and we are a country that needs to be unified. So in that sense, I would say absolutely. The idea that our government is involved in that is factual. I'm sorry about it. There we go. Is part of the equation that needs to be focused on. The idea that a lot of Republicans think is that you do everything on your own, and we know that's not true. The old axiom, it takes a village, is real. And it's going to take a village for us to heal the damage that's been done in just under 2 years. And so we're going to have to take that motive as we get into Congress, assuming we can, take this House back and take the Senate back and take our government back for the people. But we need to start bringing that idea, and I think that's what you're talking about, of a collective society that works together to improve our lives. And I absolutely support that, and I support programs that move toward that direction. Because the idea that we're going to be able to do this alone, I think, is naive, and it's just a talking point that Republicans like to talk about in politics.
So I think this is an interesting question, and my background is as an intelligence officer, which requires that I basically ask why to every assertion I hear. So when I heard your question, my thought was, well, why are people suffering from loneliness? What is causing this shift? And I think that part of it is that we are at a point in time where wages aren't going as far as they used to. People have concerns related to their health care and their stability. I had an incredibly moving conversation with a man just yesterday who was talking about how he had an emergency surgery that wasn't covered by his health care, and to dig himself out of debt, he is working extra hours. And so when we're looking at the reasons why people are not having human connections, some people may say some of it's social media, others may say it's the fact that people are spending hours upon end commuting or at work or working 2 or 3 jobs. And so I think there are places where the government can have a role in helping change some of those basic parameters of people's lives, ensuring that people have quality health care so that someone isn't working all those extra hours to pay off their health care debt, or raising the minimum wage to ensure that someone's not working 2 or 3 jobs just in order to be able to make ends meet, so they arrive home at 10 o'clock at night and there's no time for social interaction. Also, when we look at some of our communities across the district, when we look at places where we have newer immigrant communities, how could the federal government work with localities to ensure greater levels of social engagement within their newer communities that could potentially address issues of loneliness within particular communities? So I do think that there is a strong place for federal legislation or for the federal government to even partner with localities to address what ultimately comes out as loneliness, but we would have to be addressing the symptoms and the root causes, the root causes of that loneliness in order to be able to have a real accurate ability to address it through the federal government or legislation.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next question goes to Larry Mendoza with American Atheist.
All right, thank you for being here, first of all. I'm the Virginia State Director for American Atheists, and we're a nonprofit organization dedicated to ensuring and educating the public on separation of church and state. And also to make sure that all citizens have equal opportunity, regardless of your beliefs, whether it's government or elsewhere. So as such, my question is this. Under the current administration, we have been seeing an increase in the melding of church and state in almost every area, from education to the environment. The question is, how do you feel about religion in the public square, and what role do you think should religion play, if any at all, to make sound policy?
Okay, Ms. Spanberger, you have 2 minutes.
We are a secular nation. We were founded on the principle of the division between church and state, and I believe that that is one of the most important principles in this country. We have a richness in this country culturally because we have a diversity of religions and cultures where people are free to celebrate their religions and manifest who they are through their religious practices. But at the point of government, there should be a complete separation. I believe that for individuals who do have a strong faith, the faith informs who they are, and I respect that because it's part of their whole person. But when it comes to legislation and how it is that we make our laws and how it is that we conduct our business, both at the state level and at the federal level, it is important that we observe the basic tenet of our secular society, which is complete separation of church and state. We can culturally respect what religion brings to so many in our community without imposing it on other people.
So this administration is trying to weave together church and state. They're not doing it for the reasons that they're pretending it to be. This is, my opinion, largely an educational situation that we're talking about, and it's an attempt at the deconstruction of our education system to profiteer. They're trying to privatize schools. They take the money into those schools, and this is how they turn around, and it's that cycle, that vicious cycle that they support. Whether, it goes from public services, public coffers, private institutions funding their campaigns. And that's, in my opinion, what's really going on. Listen, I grew up Episcopalian. I attend St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Orange, Virginia. My faith was the basis of my moral code growing up, but I also understand fully that there is a distinct and separation between church and state in this country, and it was put there by design, and that is what has been the foundation of our country, and we need to protect it at all costs. Because we have seen around the world, when you start mixing the two together, what happens? And it's not a good mixture, folks. So it is important that we stand up for that very principle, and you can count on that, I will. Thank you. It's cutting in and out. Yeah.
So if that doesn't work, we'll see if we can swap something.
Okay.
Okay, next up is Chris Weigard. Chris Weigard from Citizens Climate Lobby.
I'm Chris Weigard with the Richmond chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. I'll get straight to my question. Science describes climate change as the ultimate nonpartisan challenge, a cumulative process that threatens current and future human generations. Somehow, for Congress, it has become the ultimate partisan topic. We will discuss climate change again later, but for now, could we ask both of you regarding the partisan atmosphere that's developed, how you would attempt to address it if you were able to serve in Congress?
So I guess is it working now? Sorry, it's cutting in and out. Anyways, there's one party in one country that denies climate change, and that's the Republican Party in the United States of America. And they are doing it, it's not because they don't believe it, because they know it's true, but they're working for the fossil fuel industry, folks. Simple fact. Inhofe, Oklahoma, throwing snowballs on the Senate floor, come on. They understand what's real, and I view climate change, there's two existential threats in my mind to the very existence of our species. One is nuclear war, and the other is climate change, and we need to be moving to get off of fossil fuels as quickly as we possibly can, and we got to do it yesterday. And it's important that we win elections because they're not going to do it, folks. The Republican Party is not going to do it. They are so concerned about kind of that corporate short-term profit motive. That's how they look at life. And we can't look at life like they do because we don't look at life like they do. So that's why we need to win. We need to win, folks, because there are so many pressing problems that our country and our world are facing that they're not going to address because they're still making money off of it. And it's not surprising that oil is getting close to $100 a barrel again, folks. It's just not. So that's what we got to do. Climate change is real. We need to get onto renewable energies as quickly as possible. Solar industry grew at 16 times the rate of the economy last year. We need to be doubling down on that. There are more people working in the state of Virginia in solar than there is in coal. It's time to move forward. And in order to move forward, we're going to have to win. And that's why we need y'all to vote.
Man. Real. Everybody try to remember, even if we hear things that we like, we want to try to keep it quiet.
That was an okay thing to clap at. So in order to address this problem, it does need to be a bipartisan solution because no matter how big this blue tsunami is, we still need to work across party lines to find sustainable, long-term, impactful legislation that we won't be volleying back and forth with every time we have any sort of flip in Congress. Climate change is a fundamental threat to our national security, to our health, to our ability to live and thrive in this country. And in order to be a part of the solution, I think that we need to make an argument in the way that other people may view that argument. When we look at an initiative in New England that was meant intentionally to reduce CO2 emissions, there was a 40% reduction in CO2. There was a boost to the economy. So when we can talk in terms of value that pushing towards renewable energy can bring to a community, if we're talking about the economic impact, if we're talking about the jobs that can come to localities through these shifts, then let's talk about those things. As you're with the Citizens Climate Lobby, I know that you're aware there's also a bipartisan there's a bipartisan caucus in Congress where in order to enter to focus on climate change and CO2 emissions, you have to join with someone of the opposite party. And I think it's an incredible model to force the idea that this needs to be something we solve together. And so I look forward to finding a Republican friend to join that caucus, because if we want to have long-term sustainable solutions, we need to make an argument that other people can agree with so that we can, in fact, create legislation that will work to solve this problem. And we've seen it happen in localities. We've seen it happen in states as red as Texas. They are the 6th largest, if they were a country, they'd be the 6th largest solar country in the world, wind. And that's the sort of argument that we need to make with people across the country so they understand the positive impact that moving towards renewables can have on their communities and their economy.
All right, I think candidates sort of have the order, so I'm going to try to stay out of the way mostly. I'm going to announce, so the next question is going to start with Ms. Spanberger. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Yes, you have 1 minute for rebuttal, and then Ms. Spanberger.
So I don't disagree with what you're saying there, that it's going to require us to work together. What I'm saying is that the Republican Party in Washington, D.C., what's left of it that will work with you on that is largely gone. It's largely gone. If we're really going to address this problem, we're going to have to do it through elections, folks, because these folks are not going to work with us on it. They're just not. What's left of this Republican Party is owned by Donald J. Trump. And I just don't see Donald Trump working on fixing our climate problems. Just don't.
That is certainly true. When we look at the budgetary cuts that have impacted our environment and our environmental protections, it is 100% a factual reality that our administration does not in any way defend the environment or prioritize it. But I believe the number is 39, which isn't a whole heck of a lot, Republican members of Congress who are currently committed to bipartisan solutions. And so while I wholly recognize that the problem exists, there is a problem at the top. As we see this wave and as we see this shift, we need to create an environment where we are working together to solve problems that are as fundamental to our country's survival, our national security, and our basic health in order to ensure that they are long-lasting solutions.
Okay.
Okay, and just for clarity, so thank you. Just waive that if I miss it.
Okay.
If you want to do a 1 minute rebuttal, the second person automatically gets a 1 minute rebuttal after that. So next up is Curtis Smith from Atheist Agnostics and Secular Humanists of Richmond. And I'm going to stay out of the way except to say the 2 minutes. So this question starts with Ms. Spanberger.
Hi, my name is Curtis Smith. I represent the Atheist Agnostics and Secular Humanists of Richmond. We're a social group. We try to do things for the community. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming, Abigail Spanberger, and thank you for coming down board. And my question is similar to his. It's actually kind of a follow-on. What would you do to promote? What bills would you put forward to promote alternative energy?
That's the question? Okay. So I would support any legislation that incentivizes the reduction of CO2 emissions. I would support any federal legislation that incentivizes at the state level or for localities an investment in renewable energies, because those renewable energies, they don't just bring cleaner energy, they also bring jobs and they bring industry to areas where we want to see continued growth. And so from a legislative perspective, I would be in support of any efforts to incentivize localities or states to make longer-term investments in renewable energy. And I would advocate for any sort of legislation that also incentivizes companies to move in that direction. So for example, car productions to allow for electric-powered cars and providing additional incentives for the production of those and ultimately for the purchase as well.
So some of the things we have to do, we have to keep our incentives in place. Right now, there are large tax incentives to keep for solar home use. And those need to stay because every year you're kind of worried about whether they need it taken away. So we need to continue that because people need to be encouraged to use solar energy. Because we have to start moving. We have to start reducing our CO2 levels. It is not an accident that our CO2 levels are rising again. They had plateaued for a couple of years. They're rising again. Not shocking with what's going on in this country. And so we need to keep that up. I think we also need to stop the pipeline. Folks, I understand that the argument there is that it is less than coal, it's less than oil, but it's also an excuse to not get to renewables. And it's time to get there, folks. It's just time to get there. We are blowing through records. I think we're at the CO2 levels, the highest in 800,000 years. And reality is coming home. And it's affecting the globe, whether you look at what's going on in Syria, you look at the migration issues in Africa, a lot of that is climate driven. And we've got to start acting and stop delaying. And I think it's important that we do that. An infrastructure bill, folks, we need to repeal that tax cut, and that money needs to go in infrastructure, and part of that infrastructure needs to be for electric cars, so electric cars can be used on the roads more easily than they are in this country right now. Thank you.
Okay. Next up is April Prentice from Alliance for Progressive Virginia.
Hi. The Alliance for Progressive Virginia is an activist and advocacy group for progressive causes. The Alliance for Progressive Virginia has a strong commitment to protecting and expanding LGBTQ plus Virginians' right to work, love, and live as full citizens in our community. Could you please explain your positions on the LGBTQ plus issues such as housing and workplace and long-term care discrimination, adoption, violence, and hate speech? And to focus on one especially concerning practice, do you think legislators have an obligation to protect minors from so-called conversion therapy, which lacks scientific grounding and has been found to be harmful to individuals subjected to the process?
You know, I think it's me first, all right? I have a dream in this country that one of these days that equal protection under the law will be just that, equal protection under the law, regardless of who you are, what you believe, what color you are, what gender you are. But we're not there. We're just not there. And the LGBTQ community is facing that firsthand. And so we have to legislate equality. Well, then by damn, we're going to legislate equality. And you can count on my support on that. It is not right that people who want to adopt aren't able to adopt. It is not right that you should be discriminated on housing, and it sure as heck isn't right to be forcing kids into conversion therapy. So this is, folks, I feel like we're going backwards sometimes, but we got to stop that. Because the history of this country is that we have stumbled, but we've always stumbled forward. I feel like we're going backwards right now, and we got to stop that in its tracks, and we got to start moving forward again.
It was just a couple of years ago that marriage equality passed. So we are going forward at a very slow pace. LGBTQI plus rights are human rights, and they are rights that I will fight for without any equivocation. They are fundamental human rights, and I will work for them. In terms of what we can do legislatively, I support the Equality Act. The Equality Act is a bill that would comprehensively add LGBTQ protections to housing laws, to school laws, to all sorts of discrimination existing frameworks. Add in LGBTQ individuals as a group of people who will be and should be protected under existing law. I also support the Safer School Act, which would provide for any public school that receives federal funding would need to have codified their anti-bullying requirements for students who are LGBTQ or identified as such. And when we look at the threat against individuals' rights, I often tell a story about the fact that I decided to run for Congress because we have dear friends who have a little girl who is terminally ill, and they need their rights protected. The other piece of that story is that they are a gay married couple and they adopted those two beautiful little girls, and they are among the best parents that I know. And the idea that any child would be denied a family because who their parents love, for me, is unconscionable, and it is to protect that dignity of their ability to pursue the same happiness as everyone else that I will work for every single day, and I absolutely oppose conversion therapy for minors.
Okay. Next up is Chad Mitchell from Virginia Secular Democrats.
My name is Chad Mitchell. I'm representing Virginia Secular Democrats. We're a group which is building towards having a secular caucus in the Virginia Democratic Party to promote secular values. My question is, on April 30th of this year, Representatives Jared Huffman, Jamie Raskin, Jerry McNerney, and Dan Kildee announced the launch of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus to promote public policy based on reason, science, and moral values, and protect the separation of church and state. What are your thoughts about the new caucus and the current amount of power that religion has in politics?
I think the caucus, the creation of that caucus is excellent. When we are looking at how it is that we should be creating policy, we should be creating policy based on evidence, based on data, based on research. And that should inform our policy, from healthcare policy to infrastructure policy to gun violence prevention policy. And the idea that we should allow for evidence and reason to drive what it is that we're doing at federal level or the state level is, I think, a primary goal that I would work towards. And when we see the encroachment of religious beliefs into our policy making, that comes at the expense of data-driven, evidence-based decision making. And so I am heartened by the idea that we would have members of Congress working to explicitly add a goal of bringing reason and taking religious ideology potentially out of our legislation, because I think that it is incredibly important as a secular country that we do that. And again, I think it adds to wonderful diversity to this country that we have so many people who do have faith that drives who they are as people, but that should be left out of our evidence-based decision-making.
So actually, no, I've worked with him on the Hill. It doesn't surprise me a bit that he's on that caucus. He is a fine congressperson from California, and I would look forward to working with him on this issue. I tell you, and it is a pushback against what I talked about in my opening statement. This is an assault on reason. It's an assault on enlightenment. It's an assault on the rule of law. And we have to band together to stop that, to stop the damage. We were founded with a strict separation between church and state. We've talked about this several times already tonight. It is clear we support that, and it is imperative that we continue to support that, and that we could keep the barriers up, because as somebody that spent a lot of time overseas, I've seen what it does when the two get mixed together, and it's not a pretty picture. And so the nefarious reasons that they're trying to mix it together, though, is what we need to be concerned about as well, because these are not, in my opinion, very religious people. They have corrupt purposes at heart, and that's what they're doing. And so you can absolutely bet that I will back evidence, I will back intellectualism, and I'll back science if I'm given the opportunity to go to Congress.
Okay, I'm going to sneak in one of my own questions, and then we're going to take, let's say, 3 audience questions, and then we're going to take a short break. If you would like to ask a question, please come up to this microphone up here, taking care not to trip on any of the electric cords. Okay. So my project is SavedByScience, and I'm concerned with how we treat each other ethically without any supernatural beliefs. Thomas Piketty in the Paris School of Economics and Emmanuel Saez at Berkeley have laid out data showing that we've indeed returned to robber baron levels of wealth disparity, with CEOs frequently making as much in one day and sometimes as much in 1 hour as their median employees make in an entire year. In light of that, what are your thoughts on a living wage? What are your thoughts on a maximum wage? And more generally, what role, if any, do you think government should play in ensuring some degree of economic justice?
So I support, I'm up front. Now, listen, let me begin with, I am a proud unionist. I'm a union leader, and I support a $15 minimum wage, and I also support a livable wage if that's not sufficient to where you live. And the wealth discrepancy in this country is out of control, and government absolutely has a role in stopping that, and unions have a role in stopping that. We are down to 4% union participation in the state of Virginia. It's unacceptable. Listen, we have our problems in unions. We do. But it is the only institution I can think of that is solely there to protect the rights of the working class in this country, and it is not an accident that the discrepancy in wages in this country has mirrored the decline of unions in this country. And I support, listen, I really want to see the Democrats in the state of Virginia, when we take the House of Delegates back and we take the Senate back, I want to see the Democrats repeal right to work in this state. I want to see it. Let's put our money where our mouth is, because it's time to step up. We got to stop the corporatocracy that's going on in this country, and the federal government absolutely has a place in that.
So I support a living wage. I support a $15 minimum wage. I agree with Dan on the principle that organized labor has historically been what's driven the middle class and provided for stability for so many families. We also need to look at other indicators within our society that causes people to fall and to create that disparity. And it includes the fact that people are paying so much for health care. It includes the fact that not all educations are created equal. And so when we are looking at how it is that we can address the problem of this greater wealth disparity, we also need to look what some of the root causes are and address them bit by bit to dismantle the hindrances that exist for so many in their path towards creating opportunity for themselves and living in a community where there is opportunity available for them to take. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Mike, if you can, Paul, if you can turn on the mic and the stand, and you can come up and ask your first question. You just have to tilt that up toward you.
Hello? Okay, oh, hello. Thank you so much. You two are doing great. My name is Max Ritter. I'm a college student. Specifically, I'm studying agricultural policy. I'm hoping to tackle issues like food insecurity and hunger and marginalization in the food system. And I feel that these problems are vastly overlooked. I mean, you can see the impact here in Richmond. You can see the impact in rural Virginia. Anywhere where there is any form of marginalization or lower income families, they have these problems just being able to feed their children. So my question for you two would be, how do you view the role of government and policy is in ensuring that all citizens can access affordable and nutritious food?
I think it is fundamentally important, because if you are spending every day worried about how you're going to feed yourself or your children, that impacts every other aspect of your life. It impacts children's ability to succeed at school, and that has long-range ramifications. When we look at the rates of food insecurity throughout the 7th District, there's actually a fantastic map that Feedmore provided, which shows that we have 20% rates as high as 20% food insecurity in parts of Henrico, parts of Chesterfield, Nottaway County, and in small portions of our northern rural counties as well. So it is a problem that impacts us. It is a problem that is occurring within our own backyards, and I don't think it's something that people talk about as frequently. When we look at the value that federal funding plays in ensuring that our local food banks are able to distribute food to church-based or community-based food banks, it's incredibly important. Their ability to survive and continue providing for people requires that federal funding. When we look at Meals on Wheels and our efforts as a community to ensure that we do not have elderly people alone suffering from loneliness and hunger, it's incredibly important that the federal government continue playing a role in providing those services. And when we look at children in school, we hear so frequently about the disparities that exist in educational systems. If a child is hungry, a child cannot learn. And if we want to ensure that our next generation is able to be successful for themselves and a successful part of our community, we need to make sure that just as we want them to have the books that they need to read and the teachers there to teach, they also themselves need to be in that classroom ready to learn. And for so many children, that means ensuring that they are not there hungry.
So access to affordable and nutritious food is important to this country. It's important to everybody. And I think we can all recognize that food deserts are real, and it's not just in the cities, to your point. It is having a tremendous effect on our health, as our healthcare issues expand because of the lack of quality food that people are eating. And that's driving our healthcare system even more and more expensive. And so your point is to the point, because we have to start addressing the very thing that keeps us going, which is our food. And right now, our congressman is playing political games with the Farm Bill. He is. He is one of the causes that the Farm Bill is not moving forward. And you know, the SNAP program and nutritional assistance programs in the Farm Bill, I can't remember if it's 76 or 80%, but it's in that neighborhood. It's huge. And we still haven't passed it yet. So we've got to get the Farm Bill passed. And not just for SNAP and for other nutritional instances, but also for sustainable farming, for renewables in farming. And you know what? We also need to stop what the Republicans want to do inside SNAP, which is to basically ship canned foods to the people who need it. Now, I agree that we need to make sure that people who need the food get nutritious food, but we need to do it smartly, and that is not a smart way of doing it. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Annette Kahn. I work at a small private school with few resources. What legislation would you support to keep guns out of our schools, out of the theaters, out of the malls?
That's me.
Where else?
Listen, folks, I grew up in the country. I literally got a single-barrel 410 for my 6th birthday. I got my hunting license when I was 9 or 10. I don't remember which. And the NRA is what taught me how to hunt and how to handle a weapon. But that was before the NRA was taken over by corporate manufacturing and people that are there to divide us, because that's what they are now. They are there to divide us. They are taking Russian money to divide us because the people that support them have to have divisive issues to win elections, and that's what they're using the Second Amendment to do. So, to your point and to your question directly, which is, what will I do on guns? 1, raise the age limit to purchase all weapons. 2, universal background checks. 3, assault weapons ban, closing the loopholes. Because we all recognize that there is a line in the Second Amendment. Because if there wasn't, you could be buying Mark 19s, and we can't. So the line needs to be on this side of assault weapons with the loopholes closed. And if you already own one, you can sell it back like they did in Australia, or you can keep it at the gun range just like it did in the Marine Corps. We would go to the armory, we would check the weapon out, we would shoot, we would clean it, and we would turn it back in and go home. And that's just fine. That allows people that have those weapons that enjoy to shoot them, they can continue to do that, but they do it in a safe manner.
So before I joined CIA, I was a federal law enforcement officer. I carried a weapon every day. I am trained with a firearm. I am comfortable with a firearm. And it is for that reason exactly that I recognize the profound responsibility that it is to own a firearm and carry one. In order to address the gun violence problem that exists in our communities, from the school shootings to community shootings to issues of domestic abuse, we need to have across-the-board reforms. First and foremost, we need background checks on every single firearm purchase, also known as universal background checks. It is expanding the standard that exists under the current Brady bill to every firearms purchase. In addition to that, we need to fund research related to gun violence, because if we are to make evidence-based policy about how it is that we can further limit gun violence within our communities, we need to understand that violence. And previously, under the Dickey Amendment, that had been limited and not something that the CDC was able to do. I also support greater funding to the NICS program, because if we are going to expand our background checks program to cover every firearms purchase, we need to ensure that the information within our databases is current and providing valuable information. So that means ensuring that states that may not have the technical capabilities have the funding to ensure that the information they can push into the NICS database system is up to date and appropriate. I support the GVRO Act, which is a Gun Violence Restraining Order Act, that would allow and incentivize states to put gun violence restraining orders in place that would allow for law enforcement to take action when family members and friends report someone in a point of crisis, so that situations like Parkland, where people saw the signs and no one could react because there was no legal parameters, that those legal parameters could exist. And I support the assault weapons ban as it's currently proposed in Congress as of February, because weapons of war do not have a place on our streets. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take one more question now, then we're going to take a 5-minute break. So after this question, please give the candidates a head start, let them go out, use the restroom, just have a little mental space. And also, don't go up to them. In these 5 minutes, actually give them a mental rest and let them meet with their campaigns, and then we'll come back. So this is the last question, then a 5-minute break.
Hi, my name is Lindsay. I have a background in studying sociology. And I was just wondering, because you both have a background in the United States role in like international policy, what you would intend to do as a member of Congress to create the United States involvement in international policy, one of peace and security rather than of war and instability.
Thank you. So my background in intelligence has given me the opportunity to see firsthand the value of aid and diplomacy. I was based at embassies overseas, working directly in support of and directly acting in diplomatic relationships. When we have strong diplomatic relationships, we position ourselves in a much stronger place to be able to be advocates for peaceful engagement across this country. When we, as a country, invest in aid in countries that are faltering, we are able to provide a greater structure of stability that impedes the ability of others to come in. When there is hunger and when there is a need, someone will fill that need. And as we've seen across the world, if aid organizations don't do it, terrorist organizations will, authoritarian strongmen will. And so I very much support an investment in aid and in diplomacy, because as General Mattis once says, if you defund the State Department, you have to buy him more bullets, and that is a principle that holds true. I also, as a member of Congress, would support ensuring that Congress has oversight over our engagement across the world, and that means looking at the authorized use of military force. We are currently still functioning under the AUMF that was put in place over a decade ago, and that is no longer appropriate. Congress needs to have a stronger role in its position as a checks and balances for the actions taken under the executive branch. And I would very much want to use my voice as a member of Congress to advocate for well-informed, thoughtful, and very reserved use of force, because we should be prioritizing diplomacy at every corner, and aid as a part of that diplomatic effort.
So that's a really great question, and I talk about this a lot. I'm not sure how many of you know, but I actually had the good fortune to work in the State Department. As a senior military advisor, I was a colonel working in the Undersecretary's office and doing policy work. War and diplomacy are on the same political spectrum. And right now, our State Department is being gutted, literally being gutted. We are losing a generation of our diplomats that we're not going to be able to replace overnight. So the long-term damage that this administration is doing to our ability to talk ourselves out of situations rather than fight ourselves out of situations is a problem. In fact, we have a volunteer who has flown all the way from Kenya, Elizabeth Shackelford, to support our campaign. She was a Foreign Service officer. She made national news in January when she resigned her position. And she explained why she resigned her position at the State Department. She cannot push these policies of this administration anymore. And she has flown all the way back from Kenya to work on our campaign to help us in the last couple of weeks here. That's how bad it's gotten in the State Department. Lizzie would have been an ambassador. I have no doubt about it. That's how good she was. There are folks like her that are fleeing the State Department at a record number. And so, you know, General Mattis is right. If you're not talking, you're shooting, because it's the same political discussion. Can we solve it with talking, or can we solve it with shooting? We would sure rather talk it with talking than shooting, because I tell you what, folks, we need better people making those decisions in Congress. And right now, this administration and the people supporting them are largely chicken hawks. They don't know what it's like to serve, they don't know what it's like to be shot at, and they don't know what it's like to be shoot at somebody. And we need more veterans in Congress who understand what that means, and the AUMF absolutely needs to be updated. It's 2001 authorization. It is unacceptable. We have troops in 93 countries right now. We need to do a better job.
All right. So thank you for a great first half. Please. So we're going to start back in 5 minutes. Paul, if you could mute the candidates' microphones, and please let the candidates out of the room before anybody else goes. Okay. So we are a bit more than halfway through. We will see how fast we can speed along, see if we can sneak in, one or two more audience questions. We're going to go down through the panel. I'll go ahead and skip mine. We're going to start back again with Jason Callahan from Greater Richmond Humanist, and the first response will be by Dan Ward.
All right, thank you. The military largely refuses to acknowledge humanist chaplains. Most prisons don't recognize humanists, allow them to meet as groups, or provide them with humanist professional support. In Richmond, outdated regulations allow individual decision makers the discretion to deny fully qualified and endorsed humanist celebrants the authorization to perform marriages. Do you think there's an uneven playing field for humanist chaplains and celebrants looking to serve their community? If so, please describe how, and if not, what would you do to address it?
So the question is the uneven playing field that humanists face in society, military, prisons, marriages, the ability to perform marriages. And yes, that is a actual factual statement, and we need to fix it. If people, it goes back to what I said a while ago, we should all be treated equally, and if that is the form of discourse that they want to have, they should be allowed to have that. And I am sure that there are plenty of people in this country, in the military, in society, that prefer humanism, and they should be allowed to have that discourse. So I would support legislation allowing you to perform those services to the military people, to citizens, and in marriages as well.
I think for me, it's a question of what are the rights of people in prison, or what are the rights of people in the military to have their personal needs be met through someone who can attend to their desire to have counseling or engagement with someone who is a humanist or who practices humanism. And I think that it's incredibly important that we look at it on both sides of what is it that someone needs. If that's the guidance that they need, then we should ensure that they have a right to that, because in a secular society, we should be ensuring that people's needs be met in that way. And from a federal perspective, I would support any legislation that permits and ensures the rights of individuals to practice their faith or lack of faith, and to practice and receive the guidance from a person of faith, no matter what the spectrum is, or where they, how they define that resource. So I would, in the spirit of separation of church and state, work to ensure that that people can ensure that they have the guidance that they choose to have based on their own personal belief systems.
Okay, Ms. Riggs from National Association of Social Workers, and on behalf of Compassion and Choices.
Religious beliefs, either the legislators' own beliefs or the religious beliefs of constituents, often shape legislators' views about a variety of issues: abortion, sex education, and medical aid in dying or death with dignity are a few examples. What's your view about legislators basing their public policy positions on personal religious beliefs? And if elected, how would you broach this issue with other elected officials?
How it is that our legislators choose to legislate needs to be driven by the needs of their constituents. And in the 7th District, we represent a community that is diverse in religious backgrounds and beliefs. We have people of faith, we have people of no faith, we have people who believe in science, we have people of every religion. And we need to have legislators who are basing their decisions on the needs of their constituents, and that means that they cannot be driven by their own personal religious beliefs or ideology, because there will be inherent conflicts that exist in their ability to serve those individuals purposefully. Now, if someone's personal beliefs do inform how they view the world and their approach, as long as that is not in any way impeding upon the rights of other individuals or changing the focus of their legislation, I think that people's religious backgrounds are something that make part of who they are if they have religion, but under no circumstances should we be letting an individual's religious beliefs dictate what it is that they are advocating for in communities, in particular because there are so many communities and so many sets of beliefs, and we need to respect them all.
So clearly, religion has played a role, and I think it's particularly playing a role in the Republican Party right now as they move policies forward that I think infringe upon the separation that exists in this country. The two, I think you mentioned three. One was abortion, death, and there was a third. What was it? Sex education. Sex education. So abortion. Folks, it is settled law. We don't need to be getting in the way of a woman and her right, which her doctor. And those legislators who keep pushing this, largely in these ruby red states, need to be stopped. And it is also vitally important that we win in the Senate, because we really do need the Supreme Court to not go any further right than it is right now. And let's all do a quick whatever you want to do tonight that Ruth Bader Ginsburg keeps hanging on. Support. Death. We've talked about that earlier. I believe that people should be able to end their lives as long as they are mentally capable of making that decision in as humane and dignified way as possible. And I support that, and I support protecting that right. And sex education, boy, is it important. I mean, education is important across the board. Sex education is also vitally important, because I tell you what, it's the areas where we don't have good sex education, where we have the high teen pregnancy rates, we have the higher abortion rates. All these things that they sit there and talk about are in areas where they don't teach sex education, and we need to double down on it. We need to double down and teach our boys and girls how to act responsibly with each other. And it is time that that gets reinforced back into our classrooms and not pulled out in an attempt basically to bring religion into our schools.
Okay, next up is Roland Winston from Mothers and Others of Virginia.
Hi, I'm Roland, and Mothers and Others of Virginia is an organization that's at advocacy for LGBTQ youth, and we primarily now are focusing on working on school push-out, school-to-prison pipelines, school-to-deportation pipeline. We know this mostly affects young kids of color, and who's at the bottom of that, and that's young gay, lesbian, and trans kids of color. And so that's something that we're working on primarily right now. Rule number one of communication is getting your message out. And so whenever you're asked a question, not in this room because you've got a friendly audience here that wants to know actually what you think, but rule number one is to get your message out regardless of the question. Mm-hmm. And so usually I'm used to seeing progressives do a pivot, but it's a soft pivot. And so last week, a congressman from California said that he believed homeowners should be able to sell their property to whoever they want to, that they shouldn't have to sell to immoral gays. And so I would see someone on our side to make a response that sounds something like, everyone should be able to do what they want to do and do business. It's a business transaction, or love is love. What I want you to do is promise me that at some point, some opportunity in campaigning, you'll take the opportunity to turn this back, whatever the question you're faced with, on the reporter and say, well, which gays are immoral? Or what about immoral heterosexual people? In other words, we've got to have something that fires up this side of the aisle and makes the other people pay attention to the question because they're okay with what they're saying. Now you may answer whatever you want to.
I just want to remind the candidates and panelists, please don't respond to any requests to make a pledge to anything, and please don't ask them to, but please do respond to the gist of the whole question.
I now gladly respond to your question. I don't know how many of you have been paying attention to my campaign, but I speak my mind. If you hadn't heard that, you should have by now. I'm not afraid to speak my mind. My positions, I think, are sound, and I stick by them. I don't change what I talk about if I'm talking to Republicans or if I'm talking to Democrats. This is a right and wrong. And it is wrong what they're doing, and they need to be told that it's wrong what they're doing. And that's why I say it's time to stand up. Folks, it's time to stand up for what's right. These folks we give them an inch and they take a mile. That's what they do. And it's time to stop it. It's time to tell that person in their face it is wrong, and our courts and our laws need to uphold what's right, because you should not be able to do that. It's discrimination, period. And we need to be better than that. And you don't have to worry about me doing that, man. I promise you. I'll tell them straight to their face.
So for me, it comes down to advocating for everyone and ensuring the basic human rights of everyone and ensuring that people are not being discriminated against. And so sugarcoating what is happening or the discussions in California related to the ability to deny homeownership to people who happen to be a gay couple, to me, it is complete discrimination. And while we absolutely need to stand up and every time say, this is discrimination, this is inappropriate, this is wrong, we also need to ensure that there is legislation that protects people from that discrimination. And so I'll revert back to, I absolutely support the Equality Act that would provide for protections in home ownership and home loans, because it is vitally important that not only do we stand up and advocate for our principles and what's right and ensure that we are working together to protect our friends and neighbors across this community and across this country, but we also need to ensure that the ability exists for people to stand up for themselves and have legal recourse when their rights are infringed upon or when they are discriminated against.
Okay. Next up, Scott Lewis from Richmond Reason and Naturalism Association.
Reason may be considered an attention to evidence as well as a means by which people put new and existing information together to arrive at change and progress. Do you think that there is too little reason in public discourse or in governance? And if so, what role might you as a representative play in changing that?
Yes, is the answer. There is far too little reason. People say things like, I got to go with my gut, or this is what I think. But opinions, frankly, shouldn't matter unless they are based on facts and evidence. And I made a joke earlier that as a former intelligence officer, the first thing I do is ask why to just about everything, and it drives our campaign team batty. But it is incredibly important that we understand not just what it is that we're trying to address. So if there is a problem related to legislation, what is the goal that we are trying to achieve? What is a societal issue we are trying to impact? What is a challenge in our community we are working to remedy? Because we have to understand what challenges we are trying to address so that we can look at evidence and data and information to inform our decisions and our legislation in a way that would positively impact whatever that challenge is. And I do think that in the age of tweets and quick responses, that witty quips take precedent over data-driven, evidence-based discussions. And I've been called wonky at times, and that's fine, because we need to be prioritizing and bringing thoughtful discussion related to defining problems and understanding how our efforts, through legislative efforts or through societal choices, we can impact the challenges facing our community. And it starts with all of us. It starts with all of us asking why. It starts with all of us really working to understand if the things we're advocating for will be addressing the problems that we seek to remedy.
Yes, once again, that's absolutely accurate. And something that over the course of my career, I found to be true with a lot of people. When you introduce new information to pre-existing beliefs, it takes a lot of people a long time to shift or pivot based on what that new information should drive the discussion to. I don't know why, it just is. And we are seeing that firsthand in government. As we continue to move forward in science and in evidence and in climate, you name it, we're interjecting new information and it's not hitting home like it needs to, and it has to. And listen, it's something that I've always done well with. I was able to very quickly pivot when I have new information introduced to me, whether it was in combat or whether it was on staff. And it is one of the reasons, I'll use as an example, when I went to Ukraine in 2014 when the Russians had invaded to rework their security budget, I knew instantly that this was the new front line. And I rewrote their budget from $2 to $4 million, I can't remember when it was, to $150 million. And it was laughed at back at the State Department, literally laughed at. The end of the year, it ended up being $260 million because it's exactly what it is. But that's the kind of discourse, that's the kind of thought that we need in our legislators. People that can take new information, process it, and pivot based on that new information if need be. And so I support that, absolutely.
Okay. Larry Mendoza from American Atheist.
Part of what American Atheist believes in is equality for everybody. And as such, equality not just on in discrimination, but also in all aspects of life, including healthcare. As such, we have seen a vast wealth redistribution happening, going from the bottom up, and this also has incurred a lot of costs in the healthcare system. So what are your feelings about single-payer healthcare?
Okay, so I'm pretty clear about that. This is what I support in healthcare. The question is, do I support single payer? The answer is yes, I support single payer. But this is what I support. Right now, I think we need to repeal that tax cut, put the individual mandate back into place. Let's stop trying to tear down the Affordable Care Act. Let's start propping it up. Let's get it moving forward instead of backwards. Let's pass Senator Kane's Medicare X, which is a public option. It allows people to buy into the Medicare system. It starts in the rural areas first, where Republicans largely live. It allows Republicans essentially to get on government health care, which works just fine. And this is the smart way to single payer, in my opinion, because then we pass single payer without the political retribution that happened in 2010 when the Republicans made us pay a price for the Affordable Care Act. We lost 63 seats in the House of Representatives. We lost thousands of seats across the country. And we're still paying the political price for it. So we need to go to single payer because it is the moral thing to do. I'm tired of people talking about access to health care because that is not health care. We need health care. We need to take the profit motive out of our health care system, but we need to do it smartly without giving the Republicans the window to crush us legislatively. And this is, I think, the way to do it. Folks, and additionally, when you're talking to your Republican friends, you can also talk about budget deficits because this is the way to get our budget deficit under control. And you can do it morally at the same time. This healthcare costs that are driving us to bankruptcy, we cannot continue under this existing system to provide healthcare to our people and at the same time maintain solvency in our government. We just can't do it. We can't afford it. Single payer is the way there, and I support it wholeheartedly.
So I have a dear friend from high school who had breast cancer in her mid-30s. She had a double mastectomy, and she told me over the weekend that she has finally paid off her mastectomy debt. The fact that any relatively young person, or really anyone of any age, would be celebrating paying off the debt of a double mastectomy because they fought breast cancer in their early 30s is horrifying. And so when we look at where we find ourselves with our healthcare system, there are people in this country, hundreds of thousands of them, who are going bankrupt every single year because some people, unlike my friend, just can't pay off the debt of a life-saving surgery, and that is wrong. I believe that we need to take immediate action to strengthen our current healthcare system because as we are moving towards a longer-term solution, we cannot continue to let hundreds of thousands of Americans go into debt in the process. That means that I support strengthening the ACA, putting an individual mandate back in place. There's a bill before Congress called the Pathway to Universal Coverage that would allow for states to directly enroll people into the ACA, to strengthen the ACA, and to provide for knowledge of relative to what the subsidies are that are available to individuals. There's also another bill before Congress that would move the sign-up date to align with tax season. So in fact, people can sign up for health care through the ACA at a more positive time and not forget right before the holidays or the new year. I support Medicare X, which is a public option, as a path towards universal coverage. In the achievement of universal coverage, I believe that a public option is the way that we can achieve that goal through government-provided insurance that does, in fact, build off of the existing Medicare network, because it exists in every single zip code across this country, and that is the way that we can achieve health care for everyone. And I do, in principle, support single payer, but I believe in universal coverage through a public option is the method that I would pursue.
Thank you. Okay, next up is Chris Wiegard from Citizens Climate Lobby.
The term sustainability calls on us to value long-term survival over short-term payoffs. In our national debate, it's often viewed by liberals in environmental terms, but by conservatives only in terms of national debt. Is there truth to both viewpoints? Are there ways to reach across the aisle to expand and clarify our understanding of this word, sustainability?
That's an excellent question. I think there is a way to expand our understanding of what the word sustainable is, and we can talk about what it means in principle when we are looking at, as you mentioned, the more conservative model, the sustainability of the debt that we are incurring as a country. It is, at this point, questionable that more conservative members of our community would indeed question the sustainability of our economic and fiscal choices when we have added at least $1.9 trillion to our deficit through the tax bill of last year. So when we're talking about what does sustainability look like, I think it is incumbent upon us to question how choices made on fiscal policy are indeed sustainable, because at this point we are at a place where they are not. When we are talking in terms of environmental policy and the sustainability that we seek to achieve within sustaining the security of our environment and protecting our environment, we can expand the way that we're talking about sustainability, but it starts with us having a conversation. It starts with people who are more on the liberal side saying, I do care about fiscal responsibility and sustainability, and it starts with us also working to find more conservative individuals where we can talk about the sustainability of our environmental status and policy and try and find places where we can cross over. The word itself does not have to be unique to those definitions that have historically potentially been on either side of the aisle, and it's about accepting the terms of both conversations so that we can remedy both problems, because both our fiscal spending is unsustainable and our environmental policy is not a positively sustainable one either. And so addressing both of those in tandem, they should not be mutually exclusive, because the word can mean multiple things.
So Chris, that's a really great question. Sustainability, right? And I think we in here understand that. We understand what sustainability means because we are looking through the lens of trying to do the right thing for people, for our society. As I mentioned earlier, I think that what's left largely of this Republican Party, now the Tuesday group folks, those are the moderate Republicans on the Hill. And those guys are leaving at a record pace. They just can't do it anymore. And those are the folks that I think you could have reached some sustainable options with. But those folks are largely gone or are leaving. And so what I mentioned earlier, I think is accurate. They are after the short-term payoff. That's the model that they are using. They're not looking for the sustainable model, whether it's environmental or economic. You know, think of the hypocrisy, folks, of the budget deficits. When President Obama inherited an economy collapsing on the verge of a depression, oh, it's the budget deficit. We can't have it, we can't have it, we can't have it. We're running the same level of budget deficit this year with a booming economy, booming, I'm putting it in quotations, because it just depends on who you are, as we did back then, almost. And yet it's not a word, but they're going to hear it next year because guess what? They're going to come after Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Because that's what kind of people we're dealing with. And it's time to start talking hard truths. It's just time, folks. And I promise you, I will do that because we are on the right side here. Because we do have long-term interest at hand. We do have long-term interest in dealing with our environment and dealing with our fiscal issues that we're going to have to do. But we're going to have to do it. Because what's left of that Republican Party is not going to work with us on it. They're going to go for that short-term, corporate, quarterly mentality. And that's what they're looking at. And that's why I think it is so imperative that we have a real blue wave to give the Republican Party the space they need to reform into something that I call American.
Okay, Curtis Smith from Atheist Agnostics and Secular Humanist of Richmond.
Violence has erupted again in Palestine and Israel. In what way should the U.S. be involved in this ongoing conflict? What solutions do you agree upon to resolve this?
So the question is about violence in Palestine and Israel. Folks, I personally believe, as somebody that spent a lot of time doing policy in the Middle East, that Bibi Netanyahu is the biggest fundamental threat to the existence of Israel there is. His policies are dangerous. And I think he's trying to drag us into a conflict in the region so that we can do his fighting for him, particularly Iran. I am really worried about Iran. I'm less worried about North Korea as I am Iran, because I think that, the scrapping of the Iran deal, the JCPOA, that's what this was. It was laying the foundation of bringing the United States into a fight in the Middle East against Iran. And listen, they are not good players, folks. They are not. But we should not have scrapped that deal. We should have kept that deal intact, and then we should have tried to put together another coalition to deal with the other bad behaviors that they're doing. And it's time for us to start guarding our own interests there. We have to be careful of what's going on, because we certainly don't need to be involved in another Middle East war. We just don't need to do it. As far as a solution to the peace in the Middle East, it's going to require a two-state solution. And Israel has to stop taking the land, and the Palestinians have to come to the bargaining table in good faith. Both sides are going to have to work towards that. And we need to be an honest broker, and right now, I don't think we can be seen as an honest broker in that discussion, because we have so sided by moving our embassy unnecessarily to Jerusalem and stoking issues. We're causing some problems, folks.
So unfortunately, the administration's decision to move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was one that was considered to be a dangerous one that diplomats from across the world understood would potentially stoke violence and degrade the ability of the United States to be a strong voice in advocating for a two-state solution. The decision that the administration made to move forward on moving the embassy is one that fundamentally harmed our ability to be a voice of reason, to help bring people to the negotiating table. And unfortunately, it's undermined our ability to be a stabilizing force. For that reason, I think it was a mistake. Many people believe it was a mistake, and we see that the outcome has been an increase in violence and fever pitch in this continued conflict. As far as how it is that we can work to achieve or address the violence in the region, we need to ensure that we are pursuing diplomatic options, that we are ensuring the engagement wherever possible of diplomatic options. We have a long and historical, strong relationship with Israel, and it is one that we should protect and work to ensure the security and stability of Israel, but that also includes providing aid in Gaza. That also includes ensuring that basic humanitarian needs are being met. And so for me, I think it is incredibly detrimental and unfortunate that we have really given up our ability as a country to be a strong voice in helping to resolve this ongoing conflict, and that we've given up our ability to have a positive influence in the region. And I hope that that's something that under a future administration we are able to regain.
Okay. Next up is April Prentice from Alliance for a Progressive Virginia.
Too often, candidates who ask for our money, our volunteer time, and our votes are often present themselves in one manner during the election and then slide in a different direction once they're in office. Where do you consider yourself on the spectrum from moderate to progressive, and why? And what assurance do we have that our voices will be heard if you do indeed win both the primary and general elections?
This is a great question. I've been asked this question before, and I oftentimes have to ask, what's a progressive? What's a moderate? What do people, because it matters the viewpoint. I consider myself to be a progressive because I believe that we need to be moving forward to create policy that positively impacts our community. We need to be making progress at every possible juncture we can, and we need to stay true to our values and work to serve our communities and create legislation that is positively impacting our communities. I commit to staying involved in this community. This is my community. This is the community that I want to serve. We have now done exactly 100 meet and greets across the district in living rooms and dining rooms and basements and community libraries so that I can be accessible to people, to the people who I'm asking to vote for me, and understanding their challenges and their stories, because that will inform how it is that I view policy discussions when there is that personal piece to it. I have committed to doing a town hall in every county across this district. There are 10. That seems like a less daunting task than 100 meet and greets in a period of 9 months. And so I think it's incredibly important that we stay accessible to constituents, and that is something that I wholly commit to doing, because the whole reason I'm running is to be available to people, because I do not feel that our current congressman cares about my voice, and I don't expect him to agree with me on policy issues. That is an understood fact, but I still want to make sure, I still, as a constituent, want to be heard. And so I want to be accountable and accessible to people, not just those who vote for me, and I hope it's a little bit over 58% of the voting population, but to everyone, because that is how we continue to serve, and I want to be held accountable, because the promises that we make along the campaign trail, we need to be accountable for the decisions that we ultimately make.
So the question between moderate and progressive, I think the underlying question is electability, right, in this district. And, you know, because Northam did, he lost this district by 3.5 points 7 months ago. And so I tell you what, if standing up for people having health care is progressive, I'm guilty. If making sure public education is protected and it's done more fairly across the board, then I'm guilty, if that's progressive. If being fiscally responsible by getting to single payer is the only sustainable method we have to balance our budgets, then I'm guilty of being progressive. If addressing gun violence is progressive, then I'm guilty of being progressive. But folks, I think that these are issues that Republican voters also care about. We're going to have to listen to one of the issues. They're going to have an issue. That's generally almost always why it is. And we're probably going to disagree on that. But these other ones, we're probably largely going to agree. And we're going to have to sit down and talk with them. And we're going to talk through it. And at the end of the day, whether it's 16% or 18% of the Republicans, depending on what day the poll is taken, that don't support Trump, that's the target audience. Those are the people that understand that what this administration is doing, which is the bigger picture here, folks, because this is what it's about. It's about the Trump administration. Those are the people we're going to be able to relate to, and we're going to need to get about 5%, because you can't count on turnout to be quite as heavy. And so that's what I think we need to focus on. So yes, I'm guilty of being progressive then. Sorry.
So this is a 1-minute rebuttal.
I don't think we need to plead guilty to being a progressive. I think it's generally considered to be a positive thing. But I also think it's incredibly important that when we're talking about how it is that we're going to win this district, it is going to be through turnout. It is going to be through getting people excited and motivated about what the possibility of their vote means. When we look at the numbers in this district, we absolutely have enough people with a history of voting for the Democratic Party in this district to turn out and win. And we can win by getting people excited and motivated in a way that they haven't been excited and motivated in years. And we look at what happened in Dawn Adams's district, for example. Her incumbent had more votes than many other people challenged across this district. He would have won in 78 of the 88 contested races, but Dawn won because she drove people out to the polls. And even though he had high turnout on the Republican side, she won because she got people excited and driven and motivated at the possibility of what that election could mean, and that's what we need to do in the 7th.
Please hold off on that.
So that's great and it's true. And people were motivated in November. We were all motivated in November because the Trump administration was on full bore at that point. And we still lost, folks. That's what I'm trying to say. We here are largely supportive because we talk to each other and we all generally agree. But we're going to need some help if we want to win. That's just what the numbers say. And I think it's going to require discourse with those few people to get them to come over. You know, there was a story that was told to me by Paul Begala. Paul Begala said Bill Clinton called him right before the election, and he asked, Mr. President, how's it going? And Paul said the president told him, it's going terribly, Paul, because they hate her in the country, but she's not going to go talk to them. She needs to talk to them, but they don't listen to me anymore. That's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to go down and sit down and talk with those folks because we're going to need a few of them. We just are.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes or so before we're going to go to the closing statements. If there are people in the audience, if there's, let's say, two or three, depending how fast we go, that would like to ask a question, please come up to the microphone now so I'm aware. If there's a few, I'll skip mine. If there's not, then we'll go. Right now, it's Chad Mitchell from Virginia, Secular Democrats.
I'd like to know, what is your position on legalizing marijuana for medicinal use with debilitating disease or in end-of-life situations, as well as what is your position on fully legalizing marijuana for recreational use?
So I guess it's me first. I absolutely support legalizing marijuana for medicinal purposes. I think it can be a tremendous asset as we start to fight the opioid epidemic in this country. It was a roofing contractor working on my roof 2 weeks ago. And he came down to me, he said, Dan, I have to pay my employees every single day. Because if I don't pay them, they can't get their pills. And if they can't get their pills, they don't come back to work. That's how bad it is, folks. And we got to start moving rapidly to addressing that problem. And I am personally tired of young people going to jail for pot when Big Pharma, who is knowingly pushing opioids onto our population, is getting off scot-free. Those are the folks that need to be going to jail, not the guy smoking a joint. As far as legalizing for recreational purposes, I still want to study, because I'm also a data person. I want to see information. I want to study what's going on in Colorado, what's going on in Oregon. Let's see the pluses and minuses, and let's figure it out before we make that determination. But absolutely, you should not be going to jail for pot. So decriminalize 100%, legalize, I want to study it.
So I support legal medical marijuana. I support the decriminalization of marijuana. And in terms of legalizing recreational use, I would like to leave that up to the states. But in order to do that, I also support allowing for the banking institutions to be able to put funds that have from dispensaries into the banking system, because for states that have chosen to legalize recreational use, there's currently the issue where that money is not able to flow easily into the banking system. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have an audience question here. Again, if there are more audience questions, come up to the mic just so I know how many people, or just toward. Okay, and go ahead with the first question.
My question, my name is Ted Brown, and I'm a constituent in the 7th District. My question is, what do you think about expanding Medicare to include dental coverage, eyeglasses, hearing aids, and also, what do you think about the policies to address the increase in drug costs?
I think it's me. So I'm just going to repeat the question since I think I heard you, but maybe others didn't. The question was, what do we think about expanding Medicare to include dental, dental and eye care, and also how do we feel about what can we do to address drug costs and rising drug costs?
And hearing aids.
And hearing. Slightly ironic, right?
Just for the timekeeper, start the time now.
So in principle, I would absolutely support expanding Medicare to cover dental, dental and hearing as well, and optical care. Going back to a question related to loneliness, I read an interesting study where it said that aging Americans who are losing their hearing actually suffer from greater levels of depression and loneliness because they become socially isolated even when they are surrounded by other people because of the fact that they are not able to hear and interact in the way that they previously used to be able to do. So I would support that because I think it's a vital piece of healthcare coverage that should be given and provided for people who are Medicare recipients. Related to drug costs, first thing, Medicare needs to be able to negotiate its prescription drug prices. That ability exists. The VA system can negotiate its prescription drug prices, but currently Medicare cannot. When we're looking at the costs and how that impacts recipients and those who need their prescription drugs, there is a tremendous impact on how it is that they can maintain their health because their prescription drug costs are increasingly becoming untenable. And so I absolutely believe that we need to legislate that or permit Medicare to be able to negotiate its prescription drug costs.
So dental, eye, hearing aids, drug costs. Yes, that should be included. I'm going to throw a mental health in there too. Because folks, it's time for us to start talking about health care, not access to health care. And this is why we need to start on the pathway to single payer. Because in that system, all of that's covered, as it should be, because it's the right thing to do. And you know, here's the kicker, is that we are spending literally, the United States government is spending literally twice as much as the rest of the world on healthcare per person. We don't even have universal coverage, and the coverage that we have is not ranked very high. We need to start down that pathway to single payer because it is not only the moral thing to do, it's also the fiscally responsible thing to do. These are the types of things that would be covered if we did that. It wouldn't be a question. You wouldn't have to parcel out all these different things.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brooke Plotnick. I'm a constituent. And looking around this room, I appreciate the diversity that we have in the room. However, it is overwhelmingly monochromatic. We have a problem, and I believe that you recognize that. We aren't making space and creating whatever we need to do to ensure that we're really being as diverse as we claim we want to be. So what specific actions have you already taken to show and ensure you represent those in the 7th who are not represented in this room? Thank you.
No, it's a great question. Diversity. It is essential to the Democratic Party if we hope to win. And what my campaign is doing on several fronts. I think this Sunday will be my 20th African American church that I've attended since I started this campaign. I'm listening. That's what I'm doing. I'm listening to the problems of the African American community because, and I know you're talking more than just the African American community, you're talking everybody, all people of color. But that's the largest constituency. It's 19% of this district. I think we as Democrats expect people of color to show up on elections and vote for us And we don't do a very good job of addressing the issues that most affect the community. Criminal justice reform, education, disparity in education, disparity in sentencing, mandatory minimums, the cash bail system. All of these things are real issues inside the communities, and we need to start addressing them as Democrats. And I pledge I will do that. My staff is about 40%, I believe is the last number, people of color. And I've already made a pledge that if I am so fortunate to be chosen, that 1/3 of my staff on the Hill will be African American, because that is the appropriate distribution. And this is how you teach people how government works. And those young people come back to their communities, and they become leaders in the community. And it's time for us to step up and do that.
So across the 7th District, we have an incredible community. We are a diverse community. We have varying religions and varying cultural backgrounds, and I have been so fortunate to engage with communities across this district. Among the things that I have done to reach out to greater communities of color and communities beyond, some of the people that you see in this room, as Brooke was mentioning, was I have reached out to the Hispanic community and Spanish-speaking community. I speak Spanish. I did a radio interview in Spanish. I'm doing another one to ensure that people have the opportunity to ask me questions and understand my answers in their own language. I am a member of the NAACP. I attend NAACP meetings here in Henrico County, where I'm a member, across the 10 counties in our district. I've attended a variety of different, not just their meetings, but also events that occur within that organization. I too visit historically African American churches so that I can be present and be available to answer questions and listen to people's concerns. I have also been present in the Muslim community. In the greater Richmond area, we have a significant South Asian community. I have so far attended 3 different Ramadan iftar dinners with the Pakistani community, with the Sudanese community. I have visited a Sikh temple, the Gurdwara, because we have a strong and diverse South Asian population here of both Hindus and Sikhs and people of other religions. In addition, I have engaged with members of historically African American cultural groups such as the Links, and met people and talked about the issues that are impacting communities. And diversity does go beyond color. It also goes to people's identity and their orientation and their gender identity and their abilities. And so I have been making myself available to and talking to people throughout all of those communities to understand the challenges that are facing people across all of our communities in this district.
Nobody's ready to go home. I think that's the signal. It's time to go home.
That was our program comic relief. Thank you. All right, we're ready for our we had one more. This is going to be our final audience question. After that, we're going to go to closing statements. I want to remind the audience now, during and after the closing statements, please do not burst into applause after either one. Wait until we dismiss the candidates and then you burst, okay? Go ahead.
Okay, I'll make this quick. So the Me Too movement has shown us that abuse of power, sexual harassment, and sexual assault knows no party lines. If someone from your staff was accused of sexual assault, how would you handle it?
That's me first? They would be fired and I would call the police. Criminal acts are criminal acts. It doesn't matter who you are, what power you have, what you're seeking to protect or not protect. The idea that anyone would be made to feel unsafe in their work environment, be it on a campaign, in a business, in a company, is absolutely inexcusable. We need to continue, and we need to continue the conversations related to sexual assault and sexual harassment, and we should have zero tolerance, because someone's ability to function and be a professional and succeed in their career should not be dependent upon who is their employer and whether or not they are lucky enough to live their career without becoming victimized in the workplace. And so I would have zero tolerance if someone on my staff was to assault someone. That would be a criminal matter, and that's a line in the sand that it would be taken over by law enforcement, because I have absolutely no tolerance for that.
So sexual assault is, You know, I think the United States of America is facing what we faced in the military back in the 90s. Right now, it's the tail hook of America. That's the best analogy I can come up with. And what happened in tail hook, what the repercussions of tail hook were back then, was severe and swift. And afterwards, from that point, it was mandatory training. Every year, mandatory training and school. You attended it, or you didn't get moved up. And if you as so much as set foot in Las Vegas in 1991, I don't care if you went to look at the GE model there, you were done. They did not promote you. If you participated in one of those outrageous events, you were instantly gone. That's how quickly the military dealt with that. And that's how we should be dealing with that in this country. We should take that model, but you know what I got to tell you folks? We still have the problem in the military. It's still real. 1 in 3 women face sexual assault in the military, and 1 in 5 men face sexual assault in the military. We've got a long ways to go, and we need to keep going down that way, but it is training, it's education, and doing what's right, which is having no tolerance for it. And as far as my staff, you know, it's not sexual assault, but we had a member of our staff do something inappropriate, and he was fired. And that happened last week, and that's how we dealt with it, because that's how I'm going to deal with it.
So I just wanted to comment on the tailhook analogy, the idea that women being raped as they walk down a hallway by their peers and their colleagues results in them being fired from military service is not, in my opinion, the way that a model for how we handle things. Those are criminal acts that should have been handled as criminal acts. And moving forward, when we see criminal acts of sexual assault perpetrated against men or women, they need to be handled as such. And we continue to see problems in our military, we continue to see problems in our society. And so I don't think that that is a good model for how it is that we handle those sorts of criminal acts.
So I guess you're saying that education and training is not a model, because that's what I just said. That was the result of tailhook. That the military took a horrible situation, and you're right, they should have prosecuted those guys, but they did deal with, I'm guessing it's almost probably a third of naval aviation was gutted, just like that. It was a huge percentage. But the point that I'm trying to make is that education and training came out of that, and we started moving forward in the right way, and I will defend that process as we move forward with education and training and no tolerance.
Okay, all right, so now we're going to move on to closing statements. Again, lots of us are nonprofits, and we do have to follow certain rules, including strict neutrality. So please do hold your applause. Don't burst after either candidate, and we'll give you a chance at the end. So, Mr. Ward, you have 3
minutes or 2 minutes?
3 minutes. You have 3 minutes for closing.
Okay. Sure. Thank you, everybody. I've really enjoyed answering your questions tonight, and I hope you have a better idea what I stand for. I don't know if all you know who I am, but I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I was number 6 of 7 boys. It was yours, mine, and ours, divorced family. We lived on a small farm in Tennessee. We raised tobacco, and we raised cattle. We had a roof over our head, we had food in our stomach, and we had love in the house, but that was about it. In 1980, we moved to Virginia. I showed steers and Culpeper. I have an agricultural background virtually my entire life outside of the Marine Corps. I earned a scholarship, a Navy ROTC scholarship to Vanderbilt. That's how I paid for my school. But because of that scholarship, I owed the Marine Corps service, and into the Marine Corps I went. I became an attack pilot. I flew in combat missions in Bosnia and Kosovo and Iraq. By 2008, I was in the reserves. I was a new hire pilot at Continental Airlines when, like many people in this country, I lost my job. We're losing 750,000 jobs a month in 2008, and I was one of them. I know what it's like to rely on the social safety net that the Democratic Party protects, and I will protect that. By 2009, I was out of money. I was out of options. I went back active duty. And I tell you, I say this often, but necessity is the mother of all invention. And I found myself using my head and less my hands. I was working in embassies all over Eastern Europe, in Romania, in Bulgaria, and Ukraine. And because of those experiences, I found myself working in President Obama's State Department as a colonel, as a senior military advisor. In 2014, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, my boss, Rose Gautamala, the undersecretary, who is now Deputy Secretary General of NATO and a big supporter of my campaign, sent me to Kyiv, Ukraine to rewrite their security budget. And one of the names we talked about in 2014 was Paul Manafort. Because in 2014, Paul Manafort worked for Viktor Yanukovych, who worked for Vladimir Putin 2 years before he is Donald Trump's campaign manager. I believe that our Constitution can handle a presidency like this one, but it requires that Congress not be complicit. This Congress is complicit. Dave Brat is a yes man to Donald Trump, and it is time to stand up, because there is a huge difference between our friends and neighbors that are Republican and what's left of this Republican Party in Washington, D.C., because what's left of that party is owned lock, stock, and barrel by Donald Trump. And I tell you what, folks, I am tired of the both sides and the false equivalency arguments, because it is not the Democrats who conspired with our enemies for power and corruption. It is not the Democrats who equated KKK and Nazis members with those of us standing up against them. And it's not the Democrats who deflect gun violence because they work for the NRA. And if you don't understand it's time to stand up, you are missing what this moment is about. This is about stopping this administration. I have been a fighter my whole life, folks. I promise you, I will fight for you. I will fight for this democracy, and I hope I can earn your vote. Thank you.
No, please hold off. All right, Ms. Spanberger, you have 3 minutes also. Hold off after this, too.
Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for being engaged in this process, and thank you for being excited by the prospect of bringing change to our district. There are 3 central figures in my life who have made me who I am. They are my father, whose commitment to lifelong service informed every professional decision I ever made. They are my mother, who was in foster care as a child and committed herself to serving others in her community and serving as a nurse and being there for people who needed others to provide for them. And my grandfather, whose incredible sense of optimism remains with me, a man who returned from World War II, married the love of his life, had 4 children, and was widowed young. And he always instilled in me this idea that the world could be a better place and that there's opportunity if you seek it and look for it. And I am running for office because I believe that that is a truth that should be available to every person in our community, every person in this country. And that requires that we ensure the fundamental equality that needs to exist and opportunity through education and through ability and resource and protections in parts of our community. And I am driven to serve this community because I believe deeply that we should and can have leaders in Washington who are committed to the people that they serve. And I have been committed to public service, and I want to continue serving. And when we look at the opportunity that exists, when we think about what it would look like to flip this seat and flip this Congress, there is so much possibility in terms of what that would mean for us legislatively, and we need to have the power to do it. We need to get people excited, and we have been endeavoring to build a campaign that is strong enough to flip this seat in 2018. We have over 1,300 people volunteering with our campaign. We have been knocking doors across this district since January. The level of enthusiasm that exists here for the possibility of change is incredible, and I am so proud to be a part of it, and I'm humbled to be a part of it because it is about what that change represents. And so for those of you who are clearly interested in bringing a change in leadership to our community, I thank you for being here. I thank you for being involved, and I am excited to have the opportunity to be here before you because my commitment to serving this community is informed by my grandfather's optimism, by my mother's grit, and my father's lifetime of service. And I ask that you consider voting for me on June 12th because I will beat Dave Brat in November.
Please hold off, everybody. I asked nicely. All right, this is just to create that moment of separation. Thank you, Paul, for running the tech in the background, Jason and Hayden for helping with the time management. Thank you very much to the audience for this great turnout. And now, please join me in thanking